Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And I promise that with every Hey Boomer episode, you are going to feel inspired in some way. You may feel inspired to recognize your own relevance or to recognize some of the opportunities and possibilities that are open to you in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. You may feel inspired by some of the educational topics that we're going to cover, which mainly will relate to our health and our well-being as we age. Or you may feel inspired by learning about ways to find peace within and to accept the stage that we are at as we age. So those are my promises to you as Hey Boomer listeners. Today, we're going to talk about where some of our perceptions of aging come from and how we can stop denying them and get into a place of acceptance as we age. Join me and my guest, Dr. Connie Zweig, as we talk about her newest book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. My guest today, Dr. Connie Zweig, just published a new book called The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. I've not finished reading this book yet because, well, it just came out, but also because there is so much to it. I'm taking my time working through the chapters and reflecting on some of the questions at the end of each chapter because there's so much to pull out and to learn in this book. Highly recommend it to anybody listening, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. But one of the things that we explore in this book is where we got our perceptions about aging and what are some of those perceptions that may be holding us back from moving gracefully, let's say, into that next stage. And so I was thinking about it, and I realized that when my parents moved into a continuing care community many years ago, I was very uncomfortable going there. I would see people coming in walkers and wheelchairs and hunched over, and they were all old people, and it just was making me so uncomfortable. And as I read in Connie's book, it brought up a memory that I had of my grandmother. My grandmother began to decline mentally and physically shortly after my grandfather's death. And I remember watching my father's impatience with her, particularly as her memory was declining. And eventually, we had to move my grandmother into a nursing home. And once she was in the nursing home, she just shrunk more, and she lost her speech, and she was strapped into a wheelchair. And it was really difficult to visit her. My grandmother at one time had been a concert violinist. She had played in a New York premier orchestra in her younger years. And when my daughter was 8 years old, she wanted to learn to play the violin. So of course I was, excited about that. So one day we decided to go visit my grandmother and bring along the violin so my daughter could play for her. And I have this vivid memory of them wheeling my grandmother out. She was so small, so shrunken. She didn't look up, strapped into this wheelchair, had no idea who we were. We tried to talk to her a little bit. And then Sandra, my daughter, started to play the violin. And I'll never forget, my grandmother looked up And it almost seemed like she smiled. And then she started to point to my daughter playing and tapping her chest and pointing and tapping, as though she was trying to tell us that she once played the violin. And when the music stopped, my grandmother shrunk back down, lost any focus, and that was the last time that I saw her. So that's a powerful image to take with me into aging. And I look forward to talking to Dr. Connie about some of that and how that might be impacting me. I also, as just before we bring her on, I wanted to remind you all there's two really important things happening on October 2nd. As you know, I am passionate about ending Alzheimer's, and the Walk to End Alzheimer's is October 2nd, and I am hosting a team and also looking for people to donate to that. And I have a goal to raise at least $1,000. So the link is on the screen. Please join me for the walk, or donate if you're unable to walk with us October 2nd, 8 o'clock here in Greenville, South Carolina. The other important thing that is happening on October 2nd is the Women's March. We need to walk to protect the rights that we have worked so hard to get and that are in danger of being taken away. So find out where the Women's March is in your community, and please go out and show solidarity with women for reproductive rights, show solidarity for voting rights, be a force for democracy. And please bring your guests to the show. Tag them, help me grow the show, tag them in the comments with an ampersand in front of their name. That's going to let them know that you are listening and that you think they should listen to. So let's do that. Put their names in their box and let them know. And hi, Connie.
Hi, Wendy.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm a little choked up by your story.
Oh, I was a little choked up too.
Yeah, it's really touching.
And we'll talk about all of that. There's a lot there. So let me tell them a little bit about you. Dr. Connie Zweig is a retired psychotherapist. She is a former meditation teacher and a former editor for a publishing company. And she is also the author of Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow, and Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality. Her newest book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul, was just released last week, right? Yeah, and is already an Amazon bestseller. Yay, Connie.
Yeah.
This book is written for baby boomers 50 plus, for anyone aging. I know we're not supposed to say that. And who want to move past denial, fear, and resistance to discover their dreams and opportunities for this stage of life. Her mission is to redefine age and to help others reimagine and reinvent it for themselves, just as we reinvented politics, work, relationships, and spirituality from the inside out. Everyone will get something from this conversation today and participate. I want to see your questions, and let's get started with this conversation.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for having me.
Thank you. So, Connie, your book, let's unpack that a little bit. The inner work of age, shifting from role to soul. What do you mean by the inner work of age?
Well, you know, in our culture, we automatically become a senior on our Medicare birthday. Happens to everyone who has the privilege to live that long. But we don't automatically become elders. From my point of view, that requires inner work. And by that, I mean emotional, psychological repair work and spiritual practice. So that can mean different things to different people. Some people, and I have lots of practices in the book for this. So some people want to give and receive forgiveness. Some people are nostalgic about the past and feel regret and can't let go, so they're not living fully present now. Or they fear the future too much, so they're not in the present moment. So there are practices for that. There are practices for, and these are from all traditions. I mean, I found practices from my two worlds of depth psychology and meditation, but there are practices from all different kinds of traditions for aging consciously. So the inner work refers to the idea that this stage of life is about contemplation. It's about harvesting all the lessons we've learned from our long lives and really examining who we are now and what's a good fit for us now. Because some of the things we're doing are left over and they're just habitual and they don't really fit who we are now, whether they're beliefs or values or behaviors. So let's re-examine them and really discover what's right for us now. And then the shift from role to soul is about the spiritual opportunity to let go of the roles and the worn out behaviors, the responsibilities that we no longer have to carry, even the masks that we've had to wear, and move our identity to an essential spiritual identity, to our deeper nature. And again, I don't tell people what that is. So it can come from your own tradition or your own lineage. You might call it God or spirit or higher self or soul, as I did. Doesn't matter to me what the language is. But the idea is that with this new longevity, with all these years we now have post-retirement, we can do the practices that will really shift our identities from role to soul.
So contemplative, and you do talk a lot about ways to do that in the book. I appreciate some of the exercises and ideas that you have there. But, you know, like I said in the intro, the Women's March, I mean, it's important that we protect our democracy and protect our rights. So I'm feeling a little dichotomy there, right? Between active participation and inner contemplation.
Yes. So I don't see a split there. So I've been meditating since I was 19 years old, but I've also been an activist since I was in Berkeley in my 20s. So for me, this stage of life is about activism as an elder, the moral voice of an elder. It's not about the midlife heroic way of protesting with moral indignation and enemy making and, you know, the ego's agenda. So we bring a different state of mind as an elder to our activism now. And so we have a different impact. And we have a different kind of attachment to the results. You know, last week I saw a video with Jane Fonda, who's 83, launching a new organization for elders to fight climate change. And she had hooked up with Bill McKibben, who started 350.org, and Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish climate activist. And there she was. And I could see in her this elder voice. I could hear the voice of the elder. I could see this woman who has gathered the fruits of her labors and is bringing them now to this critical crisis. Does she meditate? I don't know. I have no idea if she has any spiritual life. I don't think that that's her orientation. But the point is that she has a state of mind after all these decades that is different from what it would have been in her activism in her 20s and 30s and 40s.
I love that you said that, because I feel that too. I think that there's a peacefulness that we come to as we're aging, of wisdom, a peacefulness of wisdom, let's say, so that we're not just, I love how the young ones are fired up. Let's go, let's get them, you know? And we can bring in some of that wisdom of how to do it in a more meaningful way that may produce some results.
Yeah, some of us know what works and definitely what doesn't work by now.
Yeah.
And we have a kind of grounding that we didn't have then. And we have a freedom from the responsibilities of building careers and building families and making money. We have a freedom that we didn't have then. So there's a different focus and a different priority. You know, I think one distinction to be made here is between introverts and extroverts.
Mm.
You know, my training is in Jungian psychology. So introversion means that you get your juice from the inside. And people who are more introverted will want to spend more contemplative time and more solitary time with this stage of life. And people who are more extroverted, who get their juice, their energy, their inspiration from other people, will want to go out into the world more, will want to be engaging for the common good more. Mm-hmm. But the point is that we don't want to split those two apart. And I mean, when I was in Berkeley in the 60s, it was totally split. There were the spiritual people and the political people.
Right.
There's no need for that now at our age, yeah. Right? So the book is, you know, the book on activism, I mean, the chapter on activism and service focuses to some extent on the internal experience of that, on the psychology of that, on the shadow issues in that. And which I really haven't seen written about anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up shadow, because all of your books have been about that. So can you explain a little bit more about what that means for the audience?
Yes. So the term personal shadow was coined by Carl Jung, a renowned psychiatrist in the early days of psychology, to refer to the personal unconscious. And it's that part of our mind that's outside of our awareness and that contains all of the forbidden and taboo feelings, behaviors, thoughts, impulses that we had to repress or bury as kids. So if our father didn't like our sadness because it made him feel like a failure, we learn not to show sadness in order to get his love and approval. Mm-hmm. If our mother didn't like anger, it scared her, we learn not to show our anger. And so that material went into what we refer to as the shadow. I like to say the shadow is like a dark room in which our images and dreams lie dormant. And shadow work is the process of bringing them back to life.
So if they're unknown to us, how do we find them?
Well, we meet the shadows in many ways. We meet them in our addictions. We meet them in our critical comments. We meet them in our projections onto other people when we attribute something that's disowned in ourselves to somebody else. How could that 80-year-old guy wear something like that? Right? That's a projection with ageism, or a judgment, right? Colored by ageism. Mm-hmm. So we meet the shadow in all kinds of ways. In my earlier books, were really explored that in relationships. Why do we keep attracting the same person over and over again for a dysfunctional relationship? It's all about the shadow. Mm-hmm. So in later life, in midlife and beyond, the shadows of age, let's take a moment there. So imagine we live in a culture in which the messaging everywhere is it's good to be young and independent and strong and let's just stay there. Okay, so what that means is the opposite of young is old, dependent, weak.
Yeah.
Well, as we age, we start to experience some of the traits that are forbidden in our culture that carry a lot of negative charge. And as that happens, for example, as men become more dependent, they start to feel a lot of shame and no longer can accept themselves and no longer can deeply accept their circumstances. Or women begin to lose their youthful beauty, and these are stereotypes, but just in general. What happens? They buy into the anti-aging messaging, they get surgery and use products and all that stuff in order to continue looking young. And they hate themselves. I mean, in my interviews, I found so many women who could not accept how they look, how their faces look, how their bodies look as they age. It was really painful to listen to them. So, we live in this youth worshiping culture with institutional ageism, which we saw during COVID. We saw clearly the messaging around older people and the way some commentators were not valuing their lives. And so we live with ageism in the workplace with forced retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And ageism in the medical profession where, well, you're 80, so I'm not going to give you this procedure. It's all around us. And so what happens is we as children growing up with that, we internalize it. We internalize a shadow character that I call the inner ageist. And we live our lives with this inner ageist figure, which is related to your experience and your daughter's experience with your grandmother. And we carry this figure either through modeling or through messaging from the culture or through TV and media. I mean, when we were kids, remember how Archie Bunker treated his wife and all the family?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and there's been recent commercials where they've shown old people just being buffoonish.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the patronizing and the condescension. So we internalize that, not only in our minds, but in our bodies, in the body mind. And there's research now out of Yale University that just blew my mind. She's taken decades and decades in her career to look at how this inner ageist affects cognitive health and memory, physical health and cardiac disease, retirement experience, will to live, and even longevity. So if we have no way to kind of examine what's in our shadow as we enter 50 and beyond, then we're unknowingly going to be affected in all these dimensions by the inner ageist shadow. And what I'm trying to do is teach people how to work with that. First of all, how to wake up to it so we're not in denial. And second of all, how to work it through, how to process it so that we can have a different experience of our later life.
Right. And that's the second part that I'm finding the hardest, right? So I'm aware of some of my inner ageist ideas of aging. And so I don't want to get old, right? I want to stay active. I hope my mind stays alert. And so it's almost like I'm in denial of that part of me that is aware because I don't want to accept that those things are going to happen. And so that's the work that you're trying to talk about in the book, but it just feels like, I don't want to accept that I'm going to go there. So,
okay. Well, you opposed in your statement old and active.
I did, didn't I?
So right now, there are people who are active in different kinds of ways into their 90s because the health span is starting to catch up to the lifespan in our generation. So we don't know what our 80s and 90s will be like. We don't know what active will mean during those years. But what we do know is this. I have an 89-year-old friend who said to me, I don't want to be with those old people. I'm not like them.
Right.
And so he is denying his own reality, and he is projecting onto older people a them, right? An other. Instead of, okay, now I'm 89. What's possible for me with all this life experience? What a different attitude about it. So accepting it doesn't mean accepting decline. It means accepting the whole enchilada and everything that it could mean. It may mean illness at some point. It may not. It may mean loss of capacities. It may not. You may age very differently from your grandmother. We don't know. My dad also had Alzheimer's. And I wrote about that in the book. I wrote about my experience with him and a program that I discovered from a book called The End of Alzheimer's to work on the brain. And for me, this program has had radical results, fantastic results. It's not exactly what it is in the book. I worked with a doctor and, adapted it for me. But I highly recommend that we really start to do these things now, that we start to do preventive health things now in our 50s, 60s, 70s. We're not helpless. We're not helpless in that way. And even people who have the APOE gene for Alzheimer's don't all get Alzheimer's. So these individual differences are important to acknowledge, as well as the risks.
Right. And that's where the acceptance comes in, I guess, as well as still taking responsibility for living life to the best of your ability for what you have.
Yes.
And so you make a distinction in the book between growing old and becoming an elder. Would you talk about that distinction?
Yes. I also started to feel disoriented when I entered my late 60s. And I was really feeling vulnerable as I kind of contemplated retiring from clinical practice. And I started reading in the positive aging field and couldn't find anything that was right for me because it didn't really include unconscious process, the shadow. I couldn't find any material. I ended up going to a 1-year training from Saging International, which is an initiation to become a sage or an elder. And it was fabulous. And I learned so much about the meaning of this archetype, the elder, and how distinct it is from the hero and the midlife journey. But again, there was nothing about the shadow and the unconscious process. So that's when I knew I needed to write the book, and that could be a contribution I could make. So I reoriented, I kind of found this new purpose. And as that's been unfolding, I actually said to some friends last night, I feel like an elder. It's taken a few years. I feel like I'm standing now in this new position in the culture. And I don't want to call it a role because it's not like another to-do job, but it's in my language, it's an archetype. It's a new blueprint for living with the knowledge that I've gathered over my 72 years of life experience, having done a life review and really examined how my life unfolded, and having really done a lot of emotional repair work, and getting to this moment where I don't feel any regret, and doing a lot of spiritual repair work, because I've been through a lot with different spiritual teachers and communities, finding practices that work for me now, shifting roles in my marriage because my husband is ill now, and really exploring what that's about for us, and deeply accepting that I have a shortened time horizon now. And whatever I believe about life after death, whether it's Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Buddhist, isn't relevant to me, because the book is not about what to believe. It's really about the reality that my Connie-ness will pass. Because the denial of mortality is so epidemic, and I think it's hard to be an elder if you deny your own mortality and feel as if you've got years and years. Like someone who was 65 said to me the other day, I don't want to think about death. I have years, So, and she's a therapist, but that's where she's at. So there's that quality of mortality awareness, and really accepting that I don't know how much time I have left. I may have 20 years left, but I may not. And what I call mortality awareness, shadow awareness, finding a way to connect to the psyche, the unconscious process. And some people do that with dreams, with creativity, with shadow work, my method. There's all kinds of ways. And what I call pure awareness, which is the silence within us. And whether we do that with prayer or contemplative prayer or Zen practice or TM or chanting or whatever your thing is, that those qualities of awareness can lead to this stage of elder. So elder's not an age, it's a stage of development.
It's a stage, and it's a stage of being, not doing, as you said.
Well, let's not split that again.
Okay.
Because look at me and how much I'm doing. I mean, I've got 4 interviews a day, every day this week. So being doesn't mean doing nothing. Being is a state of mind in which we do.
Oh, okay. I like that.
It's the state of mind that we carry within us as an elder, so that, just like I was saying with activism, so that we are doing with a different quality of awareness. And
So,
I can tell you that my experience of this book in my 70s is totally different from my experience of the other books.
Yeah.
In my 40s, in my 30s, where I was just kind of, hyped up and grandiose. It's just not going on here. I feel gratitude mostly. Yeah.
Oh, I feel gratitude for you for writing this book. Yeah, it's really making a difference for me.
Thank you.
A question came up that maybe some people are thinking about with their spouses who may not want to explore what is next, not want to try new classes, new things. Do you have any advice on how to deal with a spouse that is in that state of mind?
This is a question through the lifespan when you're a couple, right? She wants to go to therapy and he doesn't. or he wants to work less and she doesn't, or one of them wants to meditate and the other one doesn't, or one of them wants to go on vacation. These kinds of differences go on in long marriages, no matter how intimate the people are, no matter how well the marriage works. So, I didn't write the book for couples. It's very individual.
Mhm.
And I kind of wish I had a chapter on couples, but it was long enough the way it was. So, but there are a few suggestions I could make. One is, if you feel the impulse, if you feel the call, if you hear the call to this work, do it for a little while for yourself, and then have a conversation about it. Don't make it a should. You've got to do this with me. No, just say, I learned something today about myself or about us, and I wanted to talk to you about whether we might do this differently or whether we might do something together. Like, I really like this idea of the life review, and I wanted to do it with you. Do you have any interest? No. Okay, I'm going to do it myself. So you draw out your whole life review, and then you bring it to share, and you say, oh my God, look at what I learned. So it's really about how we communicate with each other that elicits the response. And some people are going to resist no matter what. It's habitual. It may be lifelong habitual response, or it may be too much fear around this work.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people fear looking at aging because of mortality, and they don't want to think about it. And that's just understandable. That's where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
So you can't hammer on the fortress of denial.
Yeah.
It's not going to get you anywhere.
No.
But you can invite, you can ask questions. Questions are a great way in.
Questions and sharing your learning, letting yourself be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice. You mentioned archetypes. What are some of the archetypes we come across with aging?
When we grow up, in our generation, I don't know if this is happening in the generations after us, there were a lot of stories and fairy tales about the wise old man or woman, the fairy godmother. Well, where it's happening is Star Wars and Obi-Wan and Yoda, and Harry Potter, Dumbledore, Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. These are figures from literature and film that embody the elder, all the ones I mentioned. And they transmit certain qualities of eldering, like transmitting something to the hero, the next generation. Luke receives his lightsaber, right? From, I forget, is it Yoda or Obi-Wan?
Obi-Wan, I think.
Yeah. So something is passed on. There's a way that the elder connects the younger generations to the spirit world. It's like an interim figure, right? With the human world and the spirit world. So that's an archetype that I think is timeless. And it's in African culture, it's in native indigenous cultures in the US. It's pretty universal. There's a wonderful book called Hero with an African Face, that's about African myths. So that's one of the archetypes. In ancient Greece, there was Geras, Geras. He was the god of age. And we have found him on pottery, when they dig up ancient pottery from old cultures. And there are images of him as kind of a shriveled, kind of a bent man with a stick like a cane. But the belief at the time about Geras was that the more Geras you had, the more gravitas and wisdom you had. So it was a positive image in that culture.
Mm.
So, so the archetype of the elder is really cross-cultural and
Yeah.
universal. Let's see, what
We've
else?
just lost some focus on it in our generation, or in our society, I guess. We've lost some focus on the elder as a guide or someone who's wise and imparting knowledge. We instead have seen them as feeble and,
well, this is the painful consequence of this youth worshiping culture.
Yeah,
Where ageism is just, the last acceptable ism in the culture.
it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So Connie, fascinating. The inner work of age, shifting from role to soul. Everybody should take their time and go through this book and the practices in there. Very meaningful. I always try to ask my guests if there's one or two takeaways you'd like to leave our audience inspired in whatever way you feel is appropriate to this conversation.
Well, the book is an invitation to really deepen your own self-knowledge. And so the first thing I would say is that it's not over. If you have been interested in personal development, you can continue that into your 60s and 70s and 80s. You can extend your emotional and spiritual development along with your extended longevity. And it's just that we haven't had the practices. No, there's been no guide for us. As Wendy just said, there's been no guide to become an elder. And there have been very few elders modeling. We have some in the political world. But and there's some in creative elders in the media, and there's some spiritual elders, but very few people have that in their own lives, and so the invitation is to make this shift from hero midlife values and behaviors to elder, and model that in your own family, model that for your grandkids. That's uppermost in my mind when I'm with my grandchildren, is that they're internalizing their image of age from me. And sometimes I just sit still and I imagine that I'm a shade tree and they're just sitting under the shade and kind of breathing in my peacefulness.
I love that image.
So it's not about having to do something or fix something. It's like being there with them is being an elder, and they are getting that. Mm-hmm. My little 10-year-old grandson is so excited about my new book. I showed him, he's a YouTube freak, so I showed him the YouTube video. But at a deeper level, just being next to him and being still, which he does not get in his household.
Yeah.
Is really important for his own aging future.
Absolutely. And that is one of the joys of being a grandparent that I have experienced as well. So I shared Connie's contact information on the screen. Connie Zweig, zweig.com is her website. She also has a Facebook page, which is Dr. Connie Zweig. So connect with her on Facebook. Go to her website. She blogs there, so you can continue to learn and get the book.
Thank you, Wendy, so much.
Oh, thank you. So let me quickly tell people about who's going to be on next week. It should be a fun show. My guests next week are Stu and Jana Zonder, Zonder. Stu's a master musician, and he teaches both guitar and ukulele. Jana is a published author, editor, and ghostwriter. And together, they have performed as a musical comedy duo in various venues across the country And they also perform classic rock, country, blues, American show standards, and original songs. They live outside Atlanta, and I'm hoping that as we hear their story, I can talk them into playing a song or two for us.
Great.
So join us for that. Thank you for tuning in today. I know your time is valuable and truly appreciate. Hope that you felt inspired by this. Help me grow my audience. Share this out with your friends and family and, connections. And remember, you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you at risk for stroke or cardiovascular disease? Get screened with Lifeline Screening for peace of mind or early detection. Screenings are painless, easy, and non-invasive. Over 700,000 people per year get screened at Lifeline Screening. Click in the show notes for a special offer for Hey Boomer listeners.